Good afternoon, or maybe good morning, depending on where you are. My name's Risa Shimoda. I'm the Executive Director of the River Management Society, and I'm thrilled today to host a pretty awesome, diverse, and experienced group of people who are working in policy, river policy, of one sort or another. And before we get started, I wanted to mention that this is part of the fall 2025 River Careers webinar series, as we have done for the last few years. And the reason why we have the topic is that river policy is one of four areas of fulfillment that River Studies our leadership certificate students in our world. We have 17, almost 18 schools. Students are required to take. And the other topics have been the subject of the other River Career Series sessions: GIS, safety, and science. And you can see you should be able to see all of them soon, including this one on our website. So today we have a number of people whose backgrounds I'm going to read because they're varied and really interesting. And then they will tell you a little bit more about how they got to where they are now in their current jobs. André Sanchez from Cal Wild is the Community Engagement and Conservation Policy Manager. He was born in the San Joaquin Valley, nurtured by his family and community in the town of Madera. He was inspired by those factors and other life experiences. Now he's a community and environmental advocate. During his regular life, he works with the community and engagement as a conservation policy manager, where he advocates for public lands and waters. And he also advocates on issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and access related to outdoors. Prior to his time at Cal Wild, his professional journey included working for different natural resource programs and projects, including conducting aquatic restoration and amphibian surveys for Yosemite National Park. He's also very active as a volunteer with Latino Outdoors, a nationwide Latino-led organization that connects and engages leaders and as a volunteer, members of the outdoor conservation and natural movement. Nick Kunath is also here. He's from Idaho Rivers United as the conservation director. He's originally from Minnesota. He has been connected to water and the environment most of his life through canoeing and camping with his family, and spending summers during colleges guiding multi-day sea kayak trips on Lake Superior in the Apostle Islands. He moved to Idaho and became obsessive about paddling or rivers when he saw all the boating opportunities in his state and exploring other iconic Western rivers that are now nearby. Rivers and outdoors have brought him to his greatest joys, friendships, and adventures, and have now been the foundation of his career. Hattie Johnson has a bachelor's of landscape architecture, a little bit different from the University of Georgia, and is a licensed professional landscape architect. And you'll hear a little bit more from that perspective in her talk. For the past 7 years, Hattie has worked with American Whitewater as their event coordinator for the annual Gore Canyon Festival. Ryan Jackwood is from the Harpeth Conservancy as the Director of Watershed and Restoration. He's a adjunct professor in the Sustainability Institute at Lipscomb University and specializes in watershed restoration, biogeochemical processes at the land-water interface, and contaminant transport, specifically nutrients and bacteria in rivers and lakes. Pat Lane from the Pew Charitable Trust for the Intermountain West area works with stakeholders throughout that area to protect and reconnect rivers and wetlands, conserve key wildlife migration routes, and preserve areas of critical importance to biodiversity for Pew's U.S. conservation projects. His background includes advocating for healthier school environments, consulting on energy for the U.S. government, and with businesses on strategies to achieve their environmental, social, and governance goals, assisting local, state, and national electoral campaigns, and working for the U.S. Department of Energy. Here is an idea of the types of titles that these folks and others who would consider themselves policy or policy related folks. So your title might not exactly say what it is, and policy may well not be in your title. So that's why it's helpful to hear from those who do this work, because it might not be obvious if you saw their title on a piece of paper. Now here are some topics that we ask our panelists to consider, and they may address one or more of them. And if they don't, please ask them at the end, because we'll have some time for Q&A, because they know the folks who are in this audience are students or early career folks, and they can speak to this with personal experience. So here are a few questions that we asked these folks to consider as they're preparing to be here today. And I'm going to not read all of them, but they're geared towards the audience who I believe, seeing some of your names, are students, folks on your first jobs. They're talking about opportunities in their respective spheres, what kinds of opportunities there are, some advice they might have either on the job or through meeting other people, and then progressions that they might see for others who are in their organizations or folks that they might just be meeting who are like students. And they will probably touch on several of these topics. If there are things here that are really important to you that you would like to ask one or more of them, keep them in mind. And if they're not addressed, feel free to ask those questions when we get further along into the Q&A. So we're going to start with Hattie. Take it away.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Risa. Thanks for having me today. And hi, everybody. I appreciate you joining and taking the time. Like Risa said, my name's Hattie Johnson, and I'm the Southern Rockies Restoration Director at American Whitewater. Realizing I think the bio I sent Risa is a little old. Been here for almost just about 7 years now. I'm excited to kind of share my plan for my little bit of this presentation was to talk a little bit more about what I do now, what my job looks like, and then kind of rewind the tape and talk about how I ended up here. The picture we're looking at, this is just our team at American Whitewater. I, as I said, joined the very beginning of 2019, and as the Southern Rockies Stewardship Director. Our organization is a river conservation organization. We do focus on rivers with recreational value. The way I always kind of talk about it is that we use recreation kind of as the gateway drug to river conservation. And when I started the job at American Whitewater, I had no idea what to do or which direction to go. It was very much like walking in to somebody else's house to figure out how to take care of it. So it's been a really amazing learning experience in this role. I have worked with my colleague Kestrel Coons in our region to develop our and kind of separate elements of our mission into our different roles. And so that's where my title as the Southern Rockies Restoration Director came. Simply, our American Whitewater mission is to protect, restore, and enhance opportunities to safely enjoy whitewater rivers. Both Kestrel and I kind of share that enjoy element of our three-legged stool, and I get to focus on our restoration work. In our region, which is Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah, that looks a lot of working on restoring flows in rivers that have been depleted of water for consumptive use. And that looks a lot different from what many of my colleagues around the country do. In addition to some of that flow restoration, we have been focused on and looking at opportunities for dam removal or retrofit to reconnect habitats and make diversions and low head dams and other structures that can create hazards for recreators and reduce those hazards. So it's pretty much a dream job, especially now that I've kind of been able to wrap my arms around what to do and what my focus is. So Risa, if you'll go to the next slide. I came to this job from a company actually, interestingly called River Restoration. That was my first job out of college. As Risa said in my intro, I have a landscape architecture degree, and I'm a licensed landscape architect. So I worked with this firm for about 6 years, and we did riparian and river restoration. We did dam removals, we did dam retrofits that turned them into recreation structures. And it was a really incredible opportunity to take the really technical knowledge of my education and apply it to river work, which was definitely my passion. I started raft guiding and kayaking in my summers through college and continued on kind of after graduation as I somewhat looked for jobs and was very lucky to end up with this role at River Restoration. And that job got a really quick and broad overview of the process of restoration, how it goes from a lot of the work I was doing was creating graphics to help kind of sell dam removal or river restoration projects to a community or to decision makers. Then all the way to designing the technical design side of this. The picture here is a set of stairs and kind of overlook that I designed that work. And then how to take that design, get it permitted through local, state, and federal permitting processes, and then actually get to be out on site and talk to the guys driving the excavators and moving the big rocks around to get it done. So it was a really, really cool opportunity to get a very broad background and insight kind of into how we make really physical and lasting change on impacted rivers. I was to a point where I was spending a lot of time designing in AutoCAD and not talking to other human beings for entire days, and really was ready for something new. And I had been volunteering with American Whitewater for a couple years when my predecessor in my current position called me up and said he was leaving, and I was like, well, that's very convenient because I just quit my job and been looking for another one. So there were a couple of projects that American Whitewater had been involved in that I had volunteered with them, which really gave me a huge leg up on applying for my current position. The picture again here is kind of the walk-in access to a whitewater park on the Colorado River, pump house recreation areas that take out of Gore Canyon that we worked on. And it's kind of how I first met and got involved with American Whitewater. American Whitewater had been involved in supportive of in-stream water rights that were associated with the Whitewater Park that my firm designed. And it was just a really, in many ways, very lucky, right place, right time opportunity. And the firm that I was working with at that time was small and flexible, and it gave me that time to do that additional volunteer work. while still being able to go to work and make a paycheck and all of that. So the recognizing that ability in space and time to go and volunteer for organizations isn't always there, but it was definitely integral to my career path. And then Risa, if you'll click one more time, just one more picture. This was actually just from a couple weeks ago. Now coming to DC and talking with our representatives across our region about the importance of healthy rivers and flowing rivers. And it's been a really awesome journey, and I'm excited to keep doing it. And I'll wrap up there.
Okay, thank you, Hattie, so much. We're moving on. We're going to California now, West Coast. André. Oh, you gotta unmute there.
Sorry, I thought I hit it and maybe I hit it and then re-hit it. Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Risa, for allowing me the space to share. I'm actually gonna kind of take that latter part of the story sharing that Hattie just did and kind of start there for myself. Because I think that's gonna tie into the bigger message I can share with folks. So yeah, my name is André Sanchez, he, him, as pronouns. And as Risa mentioned, I am the Community Engagement and Conservation Policy Manager with Cal Wild. That is my 9 to 5, but I wear many other hats, including as a longtime volunteer with Latino Outdoors, which is a nationwide organization that focuses on trying to take the Latina community outdoors. And that ties into how I ended up here with Cal Wild. But also the overlap with how I ended up at Cal Wild is specifically they were trying to look for somebody who was uh, who had at least relationships to the San Joaquin Valley, the part of the southern more part of the Central Valley in California. And that's where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in Madera, California, which is the city and county seat of Madera County, just north of Fresno County, which also is one of the counties that holds a small portion of Yosemite National Park. And so I consider it to be one of the gateways of that park and to, that section of the Sierra Nevada. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, when I came to Cal Wild, it was an interesting time. I literally started January of 2020, which is before the world shut down from COVID. Later on in March. So I was on the job for about 2 months before things turned very crazy. And being brought on as the regional organizer, the San Joaquin Valley organizer. At the core, I'm supposed to be meeting with people, and obviously it's very difficult when there's a global pandemic going on. So that quickly shifted a lot of the work I did to many other things, but also trying to figure out new ways how to be with community. And I want to bring up the term community over and over again, or at least emphasize it a little bit more, because that is very crucial to not only my title, but everything I do, and my approach to not just my work with Cal Wild, but everything I try to do in my life. I did my undergrad at UC Davis, and I did it in wildlife fish and conservation biology. While I was there, that's when I started realizing, the smaller part of the community that was represented in the conservation sector. That being, I'm a Latino, an indigenous, male, and there was not very many of us in that space, in that department. And even now in my career, there's a few BIPOC and Latino indigenous people that are part of the leadership. We are around, and it's increasing in number, fortunately, but there's still less of us that are in the traditional space. And so I bring that up again because of the representation of community that I really try to bring forth, and that I really try to gather with when I'm doing my work. And that's part of the reason I have been a longtime volunteer with Latino Outdoors. And actually, I heard about the position for Cal Wild through the email listserv that Latino Outdoors has. It was shared to the executive director, and then that got shared to the listserv. And like I said, stars aligned. I was trying to find something, and they were looking for someone from the Valley. And I had my experience with Latino Outdoors and that network, and all that connected. Next slide, please, Teresa. So yeah, while the stars did align in that respect, there was a lot of ground laying that occurred first. That picture on the left is actually me doing during a field course. I was doing a herpetology course, and we were out in the coast range of California, looking at snakes, amphibians, and that's kind of partly what got my foot in the door to do the work in the middle picture and the far right picture. I don't know. I just thought snakes and reptiles and amphibians were all cool, but also fish. And so just by default, I ended up doing a little bit more of the aquatic and herpetological work. And that middle picture is from an AmeriCorps program I did down in the Santa Monica Mountains, as part of my bio says. Largely that was focused on trying to do trout monitoring, but part of it also included doing Western pond turtle monitoring. And so I got to snorkel around for fish and for pond turtles, which actually was tied into some of the work I had done in Yosemite. I had started doing the fish work in Yosemite, um, doing removal work, but then I ended up doing conservation work for the fish down in the Santa Monica Mountains, and then doing turtle work in the Santa Monica Mountains, which got me doing a little bit of turtle work in Yosemite. So everything is all intertwined, to say the least. And, as I shared with the last slide, things just kind of aligned. And I think that's one of the bigger emphasis that I'll come back to, how things align, and, you're not sure what's going to pop up and what's going to be useful when. Next slide, please, Risa. I'll spare you the readout of CalWild's mission, but the point here is that we primarily focus as an organization on wilderness and wild and scenic rivers. Originally, the main focus was wilderness because the prior name for CalWild was the California Wilderness Coalition, and they were started in the late 70s, and they've been around for a while. We're actually celebrating our 50th next year, which is crazy to think about. And yeah, we're a small but mighty team. We work statewide, literally, from California, Oregon border down to the Mexico, California border, and obviously Nevada and the other states to the south, east of that. So it's a lot of area to cover. I generally say my area of impact is from about the California, Oregon border over down to like the Angeles National Forest, so just north of LA. And, I split the Eastern Sierra with one of my colleagues who's based down in the desert area near Joshua Tree. So we're a small group, but we work, like I said, statewide, and we just have our hands in a lot of different spaces and communities. And that, again, I keep saying the word community, and that's the reason why, I really get to not only enjoy what I do, but I feel like my work is impactful because we are, working in so many different spaces. We have a very big tent. While our mission is, pretty focused on certain things, we as an organization, and for myself, is part of the reason I have very much appreciated being at CalWild, is because we are very inclusive with the approach that we take. Yes, we try to stay in our lane with focusing on wilderness and wild and scenic rivers, but we also understand that you need to develop relationships with community to be able to effectively do the work and create those opportunities to, move forward with your mission and your work. Next slide, Risa, please. To do that work effectively, so I'll start with the image on the left. For context, about 44% of the state of California is federally managed land. And that includes also, not only the federal land management agencies, but also Department of Interior lands. That said, within that percentage, not all of it is wilderness. As you might have seen on that last image, there is a lot of wilderness in California already, but not all of it is wilderness. There are a lot of land management agencies, but that said, they're managed in different ways, and if they're not, protected to the highest degree, such as wilderness, then we're kind of working on trying to get that to a higher level of protection in different ways. And that would include the California 30 by 30 conservation goal, which is actually, part of a bigger global effort. And it kind of stems off of E.O. Wilson's half Earth theory. And, I know he's the one that's credited, but there's other folks that were out there that are also, part of that conversation that created this concept. But California was the first subnational, as it's called, government to make it its goal to try to achieve 30% of the conservation of lands and waters by the year 2030. And that is a stepping stone towards the goal of protecting 50% of the lands and waters by the year 2050. Hence, half Earth theory, right? And we're particularly emphasizing that because not only is it because there's biodiversity loss happening, there's climate change impacts happening, but also because all of that impacts us humans, us and our communities. So, I share all this. Go ahead and go to the last slide, Risa, please. to say again, community is very key in all of this. To tie it into the bigger picture of things, and I can talk about it in the more open discussion section. Yeah, just think about who you are, think about the community you come from, think about the communities you're involved with, and how you can leverage that. And I'll leave it there, and we can circle back, and I'll emphasize a little bit more of that after. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andre. Okay, now we're coming back east.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Teresa. So I'm Ryan Jackwood. I'm the science director for the Harpeth Conservancy and an adjunct professor at Lipscomb University. We're based in Nashville. And we are a science-based nonprofit organization with a mission for clean rivers and healthy ecosystems across the state. And so we do this in a variety of ways. And you can go to the next slide. Oh, hopefully. So we've got kind of 4 buckets that we really work in. Clean water protection is really our policy kind of bucket. And so we do have 2 lawyers on staff that we're always looking at different legislation. We're always looking at different local rules, county rules, how do these things all impact river health? And so that's a big aspect of what we work on. We do this in a variety of ways. We do kind of the traditional grassroots where we're organizing community members. We are helping uplift and educate them and like helping their voices to be heard. And then we also kind of do what, you might call like a grass tops kind of approach where we are meeting with, state senators and House of Representative members. And we are, trying to educate them or inform them on different policies that may or may not impact rivers. And so that's kind of a key aspect of what we do, but it's also informed by kind of our river science and we do data analytics and we do mapping. And so we want to make sure that we're also very up informed about kind of like the current science, the best practices, and what we really should be doing kind of within the state of Tennessee. We also have a rural protection and land use bucket where it's really kind of like thinking about where is growth going. Tennessee is one of the fastest growing states in the country right now. And so where are we putting new developments? Are we getting rid of agricultural lands for developments? How is that impacting our river from a land use standpoint? And then, of course, we've got a huge community engagement, education, leadership building component too, where we're trying to be out in the community. We are trying to be available. We're trying to make sure that people can always ask us questions. The other thing I will mention too, it's interesting because Tennessee is a supermajority Republican state at the moment. So we are very much bipartisan and we work with both Democrats and Republicans on river health and water quality issues on a regular basis. And it's really, it's very easy to kind of convince people that this is what everyone should be concerned about this and not just kind of one side of the aisle or the other. You can go to the next slide, please. So we do this in a variety of ways. We're out in the communities, we're leading cleanups, we are actually doing some of the science, and then we're down on the hill talking to legislators, talking to decision makers. We are meeting with county mayors, city mayors about different kind of policy and rules that are around kind of rivers, the Clean Water Act, and how we can kind of help adjust those or make sure that they are uplifted so that we are truly protecting our rivers in the way that we need to. And probably a lot of people don't know this, but the Southeast US is like the 3rd most aquatically biodiverse region in the entire world behind the Amazon jungle and the Mekong jungle. So these rivers that we have here in Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, they are some of the most just precious and kind of river resources across the world that we need to be protecting. And so it's a big part of our mission, and that's a big part of kind of our communication strategy as well. And I guess I would kind of say, I think that Andre and Hattie did a really good job of kind of explaining that like networking is key when you're trying to kind of get into these spaces about like where to work and what kind of jobs are available. Professional conferences, professional organizations to kind of getting involved with those, volunteering at local kind of river groups. We just recently hired a program manager, and it was basically because he had been volunteering and kind of like knew us and we had over 30 applications for this one position. And so I think that that's really important is like, let them get to know you and let them know that, you're committed and that you have passion and that, you are getting out there and volunteering, kind of make yourself known, because that goes a long way when you're kind of thinking about getting an entry-level job or kind of getting your foot in the door for some of these organizations. And I think I will leave it there and let Pat take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. And thanks everybody for taking some time to listen to us chat today. I'm Pat Lane. I work for the Pew Charitable Trust, and I am lucky enough to get to manage our conservation portfolio in what we call the Intermountain West. It's an internally designated region, which essentially means every state west of the Mississippi that has a mountain but not a coast. Pew is a fascinating place to work. I am part of a medium-sized program within the organization that addresses everything from children's dental access to prison reform to substance abuse treatments to conservation across the globe. And it's a great place to work. I've been here for about 10 years now. Our conservation priorities as it pertains to rivers specifically are sort of threefold. One is river connectivity. I get to work with great people like André and Hattie on both removing barriers that are either obsolete or dangerous or are harmful to the system. The other two are water quality. So we work with states to essentially set a floor for degradation. So it's through the Outstanding Natural Resource Waters designation provided by the Clean Water Act. Many of you are probably familiar with it, and we work in states across the West to designate truly remarkable waters as outstanding and keep them from being further degraded. And then the final way is through our water quantity work, right? It'd be kind of silly to be working on water in the West without acknowledging the crisis that our river systems are in and are going to continue to be in. So we are working to essentially loosen the foundation of water law in the West that makes it nearly impossible for farmers, for example, to retire or lease their water rights. So those are the three main bodies of work that we get to work on. And if you go to the next slide, Risa, thank you. I threw this in here because I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got started. I'm not good at giving advice. I can just sort of give my experience, right? And if you see anything in my experience that connects with yours, I'd be happy to connect offline or through LinkedIn. You can reach out. But I got my start as a ranch hand and outdoor guide, and had the opportunity to begin managing some folks, both on the ranch and in guiding. And then I got into campaigning, and my first sort of gig was knocking doors for, I think, the Kerry campaign, and then later for President Obama's first campaign. And it was negative 30 degrees out in Iowa, and I was knocking door to door with my best friend from high school, Joe. And I always say a stint on a campaign is like a career on speed. So it started in Iowa, and I went to 4 different states, and I ended up managing our field program in Pennsylvania. And so one of the notes that I would just put out there is getting into civics is a great way to sort of supercharge a career. You don't have to have any experience to volunteer, right? And I think that's one of the themes you might have been hearing is just show up until they start paying you. I think 3 people have said something along those lines, but that's what I did. And we had a blast. So it's been fun. This is Senator Heinrich here. I'm not in this picture. I'm allergic to taking pictures. But this is a group of folks that I love working with out of New Mexico, and we are advocating for the Gila River and San Francisco rivers to be made, to be designated at the federal level as wild and scenic, which means that they are currently unobstructed, and we want to keep them that way. So we're having fun both in DC and in state capitals across the West. And I forget, yes, I do have one more slide, Risa. And I know that the folks on the call today, many of you are specializing in certain areas of river policy, but I just want to throw a pitch out there for the generalist. Often in a career search, that is almost like a dirty word, right? But there is a lot of space for people who are not necessarily laser focused on one aspect of river policy, but instead are focused on just making things a little bit better, right? And so here are some examples of jobs of generalists in terms of people that I work with. I would follow into that lobbyist or grant maker category. But I work with great people that do great work and make good things happen all across the country and the globe, that work in finance, communications, as guides and advocates, even social media influencers, right? Fundraisers, analysts, management and strategy. And so I'd be happy to chat with anybody about any of these roles, but all to note that, the degree and the certificates are good, but there's a lot to be done if you've got the energy and sort of that feeling for leadership, that you can market as a generalist. So just a call out to the generalist there. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it to Nick.
Thanks, Pat. And thanks everybody and Risa for being here and putting this together. My name is Nick Kunath. I'm the Conservation Director at Idaho Rivers United. And yeah, as the name implies, IRU is a statewide organization and we're relatively small, 7 staff members total. So there's kind of a good variety of different folks here, but we're a smaller organization and our mission is to pretty simply to protect and enhance the rivers and fisheries of Idaho. So it's pretty broad mandate, but we were founded in 1990 initially from a group of paddlers to stop a proposed hydro project on the North Fork of the Payette. And ever since then, our kind of scope has evolved and expanded, but we've still kind of remained true to that kind of founding mission of being really rooted in river conservation and have a awesome cross section of supporters and members that are, really unique and diverse group of river users, say more broadly. And at IRU, our conservation campaigns, I'd say, are kind of split into a few main buckets or really pillars. And almost as long as we've been an organization, our main focus has been around the recovery and issues facing anadromous fish, and particularly the salmon and steelhead in the Snake River. And that's one where we were kind of skew outside of the Idaho boundaries, since those are fish that are connected to the Columbia Basin and out into the ocean. So it's a pretty far-reaching one that we get a little outside of Idaho, but for the most part, everything else is internally. We also do a lot of work on river protections. So that's pretty broadly through forest planning initiatives, which really set the tone of how the Forest Service or BLM's land management plans impact how these resources are managed, down to specific project level issues. And we also do work wherever we can to try to expand permanent protections, most often through Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. We're proud to host a number of those rivers here in the state, but are always looking to add a few more wherever possible. We're also been doing a lot of work around mining and mining policy reform. Just Idaho is pretty rich in mineral resources, and that's been a very popular topic lately, and it's something that's really come into focus for us. It's been something we've been working on for a while, but lately it's really ramped up. Just as our economy continues to evolve, we need these things, these resources that are in the ground. And unfortunately for us, there's so much water in Idaho, it's pretty hard for a mine to be sited in a place that doesn't have some pretty serious implications to water quality or water resources, fisheries, wildlife, all those different things. So we spend a lot of time on that as well. And then we also have a pretty robust volunteer and stewardship program. And the photo on the screen, we were really lucky. This is from just this summer. We had a trip down the Maine salmon with some of our supporters and donors. So I can't quite recall what I was talking about now, but pointing to something over there, that side of the river is squarely within the Wild Scenic River Corridor. We were on the north boundary, which still is within it, but just kind of the different cross sections here. And go to the next slide, Risa. So like some other folks, and thanks, Pat, for calling out the generalist, because I would certainly call myself that. I think before getting my start at IRU, I feel really fortunate and lucky to have the job that I do today. But I would say before IRU, I was a pretty typical dirtbag kayaker. That I moved to Idaho specifically, for a different job, but it was to paddle. And I was really drawn to all the rivers that we have here. And I was fortunate enough the first weekend I was in town, I got to paddle a portion of the South Fork of the Salmon, which is pictured here. This is on a trip, not that first time, but more recently. But I got to paddle the South Fork of the Salmon and was just blown away by what was in my new backyard and these places, coming from the Midwest that I'd only seen on, kayak videos, and was like just amazed that I got to be in these places myself. And this was home for me now. And on that first trip, I also learned about a mine proposal at the headwaters of the South Fork of the Salmon that was something that I'd come to spend a lot of time working on. But I just kind of came for the rivers, and they've always been a big part of what I care about, and started to get involved. And once I learned about this mine proposal, what was happening, starting to dive into it, and just continued to kind of pay attention to what was happening in the background. And that was something I was doing kind of everywhere I had found myself before, whether I was working in conservation or not, just kind of knowing what was happening within the community and staying involved. You can go to the next slide as well, please. So for me, I have a background and degrees in environmental studies, and then as well as Native American studies and sociology. So not something that's, a direct path necessarily to conservation, but there was always kind of overlaid there. And after college, I wasn't sure where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do with that, and was guiding and working in education. And as I was saying, just was always kind of following what was happening in my respective communities. And was really fortunate to kind of go full circle, where I was staying involved, knew of IRU, and went from somebody who was filling out the petitions and getting their emails to now I get to write them for other folks to try to get them involved. And while I feel like it's kind of random and feel very fortunate how I got to where I am, it's also not that random. I think when I think back on it, like staying involved, knowing what's happening in your community. And as Pat was saying, just show up until they start paying you is great. And knowing who's out there, and no matter what part of the country you're in, there's a watershed group, there's small local organizations or big national folks that may be headquartered there, that there's stuff going on, and there's ways you can get your foot in the door. And while I didn't necessarily think I had the best shot when I first applied for the conservation associate position that I first landed at IRU, what I maybe lacked in field experience, I made up for it with passion of the resources that we were working to protect, and having spent time in those areas, which I think goes a long way. And some other advice I guess I have, going from paddling the rivers to getting to go on field tours, the image on the left of the Stibnite mine site and some of the restoration or what they're planning to do there, and getting to do awesome things like fly in a little plane to get overhead perspective of the areas we're working on, is stuff I never really envisioned myself being able to do. But what really got me here was just that curiosity and wanting to learn about it. Because again, I don't have a fisheries biologist background or anything like that, but being able to spend time with some pretty wonky big documents, I think will go a long way. That so much of the work we do is pretty in the weeds, that being able to get into it and have that curiosity and kind of have an investigative journalist mind is really what I feel like I do most of the time. Is, like I said, I'm not a geochemist or, geomorphologist, but I can read these documents and see what kind of sticks out, and then go to our partners who maybe have that expertise and dive into it a little bit deeper. And I'd say my other big piece of advice is certainly within the policy realm, and kind of what I think a lot of us do, is being a strong writer is incredibly important. And I need to practice this myself more, is just write often, even if you're not planning to have that be published. Just practice writing what you've just, read about. It'll help you synthesize it better, retain it. And, if we're spending weeks reading these 1,000-page environmental impact statements and trying to distill it down to our members, we got to find a way to cut to what's important and why people should care about it, because often the little nuggets are buried in there, but you got to really find them and pull them out. So being a strong writer goes a long way. And, the more time you spend in conservation, it's also gonna you have to start writing other things like grants and all these other avenues that you maybe didn't envision doing before. So that's also a big part of it that, yeah, I never expected how much writing and reading I'd be doing, but that's a big part of it. And you certainly don't have to have a law degree, but also being legally curious, I think, is a good thing as well. And kind of understanding how these bedrock environmental laws and policies interact with one another is also super important to know when, the Clean Water Act versus, the Wild and Scenic Act intersect, or just understanding what NEPA is and what that means for public engagement. Those are all things that, again, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand what's happening, but having that curiosity of like, where are our trigger points, or where can we really have a place to make change happen is super important. And I think that's kind of where I'll end, but yeah, happy to answer any questions. And yeah, I think just apply often, put your name out there, and stay involved is the best piece of advice that I have to kind of hopefully find yourself where we are in a few years or next year.
Thanks, Nick. I like apply often.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you for everyone who's spoken and shared their stories and offers to help. Just kind of, Hattie is going to put in the chat a little survey. If you would take, it's really short, so if you would take a minute to fill that out. Before we finish, and I'm just going to unshare my screen in a second so we can just have folks ask questions. A couple of programs that we have coming up. We have almost a week long, speaking about fluvial geomorphology, Nick, a class from Dr. John Field, and it's actually full. We have a waiting list. And so that'll be in a couple of weeks. And then we have river management roundtables that, then next week, a river management roundtable on working with landowners. And it will be the second in a series of, well, we'll have maybe 6 next year, a whole bunch of roundtables for water trails oriented folks. So they're probably interesting to anyone who works on rivers in management capacity at all, your group or individually, but a little bit geared towards water trails folks who are trying to create these experiences, from safety to signage to community engagement to legal stuff or easements, like what we're going to be talking about this month. And then finally, at the end of the last roundtable for the year, we're calling it We're Still Standing. We're just going to do a check-in on how people's year went. And we're going to keep it positive. Like, what did you learn going forward? So it's not like a complaining session, even though all of our lives kind of went upside down and inside out a little bit. But we've done this a couple of times, and it's helpful to hear how other people's experiences have gone. Partly peer learning, partly commiseration, partly inspiring when people have turned, lemons into lemonade. So that's what we're going to do next month. And I'm going to stop the presentation there and then just open it up for folks. I see there might be a couple of things in the chat. If you have questions. Yeah, I just see comments so much more. And then, but if there are any questions, we don't have so many people. If you'd like to ask them, please unmute yourself and just chime in, because we have these guys here for another few minutes. And I think it's a great opportunity to have folks here who are here for you. So please, if you're a student or if you're an advisor or if you are. Yes, André, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to circle back to something really quick that I was kind of leading to earlier. And actually, I think Pat laid out a great foundation for it, in terms of him pointing out, like if you're a generalist and you have the passion, there's this space for you, right? To that end, I kind of gave examples of the different experiences I had and, some of the stuff that was mentioned in my bio. But I think overall, like, truthfully, I didn't envision to end up where I'm at. When I was first getting into even like working on my degree, my focus was like, I want to be outside and I want to work with wildlife. I actually was like, I want to be away from people. And ironically, now literally all I do is work with people. And I share that in particular because, again, like, you don't know what's going to be useful for what job you might end up in, even if it is, a short term, long term kind of thing, a couple years. I think Hattie kind of said, right? It's like with the river or business that she was part of doing the designing, that kind of showed her the ins and outs of river restoration and conservation. And correct me if I'm wrong, Hattie, if I heard that incorrectly. And then ultimately that translated to what she's doing now. I would say, at least for me, one of the big things I also tie in, and it ties into, part of me sharing my personal story, is my lived experience was, especially as I was jumping into this space in the conservation policy world, very integral. Especially as I mentioned, they were very intentionally looking for somebody from the San Joaquin Valley. And unless you were born and raised there, like you're not really going to have that understanding, or at least if you didn't have like family that you were visiting, you weren't going to understand like what conservation and the impacts of conservation would mean for, the community there. To that end, I know even Nick kind of shared, he had experience paddling these places and he didn't necessarily have the deeper understanding early on, because, that's just not the experience he had. But now, literally, he's here on a professional career panel talking about it, right? And so I kind of will emphasize again, some of what I mentioned earlier in terms of like, where do you come from? What are the lessons that you learned outside of even your academics, and how is that intertwined with, what you're trying to achieve in your professional sense? With the volunteering I did with Latino Outdoors, for me, it was kind of tied into like I was one of the few people who, I know from my community, Madera, who was a hiker, who was a backpacker. And it's like, okay, well, now that I have this personal lived experience and these skills, how can I leverage that to the greater community? And, I've been able to like support that space. And again, that translated to me then engaging with community and now doing the community engagement that I do with Cal Wild. And so again, it's just like, what are the things that you experience even outside of the academic space, and how is that intertwined, and how can you build upon that to continue moving forward?
Well, thank you, André. So Lauren, you've had your hand up and waiting patiently. What's up?
Yeah, quick question. I am just curious. I feel like the job market is pretty, competitive these days. And I'm curious on any of the panelists' perspectives on if it feels like important or necessary to obtain like a graduate degree. And if I were to like want to work in policy specifically, if it would serve better to get like more like an MPA route or kind of go and like get like an MS.
Anyone who
I
has,
can,
I'd love to hear what other people say, but I will real quickly say that my advice that I always give to students is go find the job that you want, look what that job description is, and see what the requirements are. If you don't have to go get a PhD to have the job that you want, then don't go spend the money to go get it, kind of thing. Same with like a master's degree, and same with like, so I would just say like definitely go look at, see kind of find the person that you're like, I want their job, and see kind of what they're like what they have in their education background.
yeah, I mean, it's certainly not required. There's, I don't have an advanced degree. I was unsure where I wanted to go and got really lucky. But I will also say that, if you have an interest and know that's where you maybe want to go, that degree is going to be that much more powerful the earlier you get it. Like I was thinking about going to law school right after school and didn't. And now I'm 36, still like, maybe I should have. And now I might go back, and it's a little different calculus. But I don't know if there's a right answer. Like you certainly don't need it. But if it's something that, like I am interested in continuing this, will provide more opportunity perhaps down the road as well.
Sure.
And I'd echo Ryan's note there. If the job you want has a requirement for the degree, then it makes sense. But I got to tell you, the people that I work with, there's very, very few that have advanced degrees. And these are folks that are leading organizations and, working in government, right? And so I I still question why I got an MBA. I guess I wanted a break from work almost, and that's probably the most value I got out of it. So I'll give you the other side of that coin.
Yeah, I'll respond with the usual answer I give other people that I've advised as to whether or not they should just go to grad school in the first place. And it kind of ties into both of the answers that Nick and Ryan particularly gave. Yes, it's useful to look at like what kind of job you want to end up at, but as I pointed out, like I didn't know where I was going to end up. I just knew I had a passion, right? And it is useful to have these skill sets and to have like a time frame in mind. But if you don't really know what you're going to do, like especially for grad school and then potentially a job, then I would say in that respect, don't go. So if you don't have an idea of what your next step is, whether it is specifically for a job or a specific program that you're trying to get training from or whatnot, then don't go. That's the perspective I would share. And I did go to a grad program and that was more scientific, and yet I'm still doing like, the policy world. It's been useful. It definitely, again, is something else that I didn't know was going to be helpful in the ways that I'm doing it, the work I'm doing, but I didn't go to do a degree for what I'm doing.
Yeah, and just to piggyback, I agree with like so much of what folks said. I think, and at least from my experience, I also don't have an advanced degree, and I'm also 36 and want to go back to school and try to and I think maybe Pat for a nice little break from work too. It's I don't think I maybe realized that aspect of it. But
yeah.
I was the job I currently have had a requirement for a master's level degree, and I basically like argued my like prior experience could be equal to that. And so I would take that into consideration as well.
Whitney, you've been patient.
Hello. Thank you all for sharing all of your insights and everything. So a lot of you guys mentioned volunteering as an avenue to get involved into and getting connected with an organization. And as an early career professional who is also interested in like moving away from the area, there's that barrier of not being able to like volunteer directly with the organization prior to applying for a job with them. Is there any advice for sort of overcoming that when there most likely is someone or multiple people who are volunteering with this organization and who are also interested in the job openings as they are arising?
I would say, fortunately and unfortunately, we live in a day and age that social media is so widespread and influential. I think that almost every organization can benefit from having social media presence, especially for younger, crowds like yourself. So I would say that's a remote option. You can always be like a social media intern volunteer and run their page. If they don't already have one, yeah, I would say that's something that you consider.
There's a lot of remote work that we would consider from a volunteering perspective. It could be anything from, like Andre said, like social media running, or it could be like reviewing permits, and like, hey, write a summary of like these 10 different permits that like people are trying to fill out. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, even if you aren't local.
I'll also just say, as an organization, we've actually talked a lot recently about how like the pipeline of volunteering to staff like isn't the way to like get the most diverse or perspectives and backgrounds as an organization too. So I think like because there's a lot of privilege in being able to volunteer, whether it's like geographic situation, financial situation. So I think like I don't have like a great solution for you right now, especially like just hearing from all of us that was really integral in our career path. But I do think I hope that it's something, especially like nonprofits are recognizing and looking at addressing as they look to hire new people.
We're a little bit past time, but this is like the question of the day. If we could do like a speed dating round on Katrina's question. Your biggest challenge or obstacle you faced when you were starting in this position, or I would say maybe you would appreciate in another position, and how'd you get through it?
I'll
I'll,
Yeah.
if you don't mind popping, because I do have to run.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about this question, and thank you for offering it. For me, it was learning where to slow down, right? So as I was starting, it was go, 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 push, 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 and trying to change the organizations that I was working within. And that doesn't necessarily work when it's the Department of Energy, right? So you got to figure out where you get to slow down that works for the organization you're working for, and what to push. And that was a very long, painful learning process for me. But that's what I would identify. And I really appreciate, Risa, you organizing this, and everybody for your thoughtful questions.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to just chime in quickly? I want to honor folks' time because we are past time, but please do, because this is a comment.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if this is like a cop out, but like, it's had being patient. Like when I started, like so many of the campaigns and things that we work on happen over, many years, sometimes decades before they happen. That I remember when I got hired, I had all these great ideas and like, oh, we tried that in 2002, it didn't work, or this happened a long time ago. There's so much history often rolled up into some of these campaigns, especially when you're talking about policy change or getting something big to happen on your landscape or prevent something that just takes a lot of time to get up to speed. That when I got hired, I really felt like I was in the deep end. And it's like there's so much to learn, but it'll come over time. But yeah, there's just a lot of stuff you need to learn that isn't always apparent, no matter how good the onboarding could be, or what you have at your disposal. There's just a lot of history often behind the work that just takes a lot of time to understand what avenue you actually have in front of you to get to your end goal.
Thanks. André.
Yeah, I'll keep it super quick. I feel like a lot of people experience imposter syndrome in many different regards of their life, and that was honestly probably the biggest obstacle for me, for a couple of reasons, but especially because I was like, I have no policy experience. I have no formal community organizing experience, like as a full-time job. Yeah, I organize events with community, but that goes into like what I mentioned, earlier. I started realizing the power of all the different experiences I did have amassed in my life. And I was like, okay, this is how I get through it. And this is how I recognize, how I can navigate this space in my own way and still be effective.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. And like that's still the big, I still feel that every day. Today, actually all day. It's been feeling that. So yeah. And I guess like the only difference is like and a lot of it, I think the stuff Nick was saying too, like definitely resonates with me, that there's kind of, our organization's been around for 70 years. So it's like people have done the things and tried the stuff. And so it's like it's just finding out how like your life experience, interests, passions kind of fit in, and making it your own. And then realizing that like imposter syndrome won't kill you. You can handle it.
I totally agree with all of you guys. And I would say that ask a lot of questions. I think all of our panelists here would be happy to answer as many questions as you guys would want to know from us, but also then voice your opinion. Someone said earlier, I think, don't be scared of your boss. Like, voice your opinion. Like, that's like the whole point. We want to hear from you. We're all trying to do this collaboratively. All of this is so complicated that not one of us is like an expert in everything. So like you have to be collaborative, and we have to work together on a lot of this stuff.
Well, thank you. Oh, and here's like the piece de resistance, however you say that. Francis is at KS Wild. They're going to have a job opening. If anyone's interested to go to Ashland, work with the Rogue Riverkeeper, she might be interested here. So thank you again, everyone, so much, and for your questions too. They were really good questions, and relevant and probing, and we love you for doing what you're doing, or aspiring to be what you want to be. And we'll see you again. So thanks again, everyone.